Welcome everyone to the first Planworks Power Hour of 2024. At Planworks, we specialise in supporting mainly one-person directly authorised financial planning firms with their power planning and their research needs. Today, I'm over the moon to be joined by Mel Hallman from CATS, who is going to be taking us through pretty much everything we need to know about the journey into direct authorisation with the FCA as a financial advisor. Like me, Mel has been in the financial services profession for many years, and she runs compliance and training solutions. She gets involved with all things compliance, including taking advisors through their FCA applications, and she's also a mentor for the Power Planner Club, supporting those in our profession to excel. We will be recording today's session, and if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we'll cover them off as we go, and I know I'll be asking my own questions too. So thank you to Mel for joining us, and I'm going to pass over to you now.
Hi, Sean. Sean. Thank you for that. Those kind of words and everything. Yeah, and welcome everybody to this session today. So I'm going to be talking about the FCA application process because I know there's a lot of hesitation, I think, out there and uncertainty, and there's a lot of rumours, I think, about what's going on with the FCA and direct authorisation applications. So I'm just going to go through a little presentation. Just bring it up now.
Great. Yeah, if you want to share your screen, Mel.
Perfect. Going directly authorised. So we've got a couple of learning points, which is basically, what is the application process, and what do you need to prepare as part of that application process. So it's important that you go in with your eyes open and manage your own expectations. And the FCA recently over the last 18 months has gradually made the application process a lot firmer, stricter, and there's a reason for that, and that's because the FCA for years has been hounded, rightly so, about the number of FSCS fees. Our levies are going up constantly year on year. We should be stopping roads getting authorised. Why hasn't the FCA done a more thorough due diligence, and why do they approve these people phoenixing and all the rest of it? And so, we've given pressure to make sure that the application process is more stringent, and they are delivering. They are doing that, and you will see stats from the FCA that says that they are rejecting quite a number of applications, as well as the ones that are being passed through the application process. But so we shouldn't see the application process as being a barrier to entry. We shouldn't see it as delaying competition in the market. We shouldn't really see it as a negative thing, which is do you know what? If we get authorised after going through this stringent process, we are going to be a bloody good firm, and we're going to be, the FCA are giving us the seal of approval to start being directly authorised, and that should be as a positive thing. So let's just start to manage your expectations, I suppose. So the first thing, if you are thinking of setting up your own business, you're an advisor for a firm at the moment, whether it's directly authorised or part of a network, for you, making that decision to set up on your own is a big deal. And there's a lot to consider. So the first thing is, do you want to go directly authorised? Are you firmly held on that? Or was an appointed representative, being an AR, appointed representative, being the more appropriate route? So you've got the firm established first and then go directly authorised. Now, there's pros and cons to both, and this really comes down to your own circumstances. Going directly authorised means that you are in control of your own destiny. You can have your own charging structure, your own investment process. You will be running the show. To be an appointed representative, whether that's part of a bigger network or a smaller firm, you will have to adhere to their T&C requirements. And the rules on appointed representatives is a lot stricter now since December 2022. There's a lot more scrutiny by the FCA on principal firms that have ARs, and indeed the FCA have started another round of contacting principal firms with ARs to challenge them and question them about how they're monitoring their ARs. So that means that your charges could be quite expensive as an appointed representative and a bit more constraining. But equally, at the same time, it means that you can establish your own brand, you can establish your own entity and not be bogged down with the red data returns and all the reporting requirements and governance that you have to do at outset if you were a directly authorised firm. So pros and cons of both. Would being an appointed representative put you in good stead to then become a directly authorised firm in a couple of years' time? Yes, yeah, it would, because it shows that you've got experience of running your own firm. But don't see that as a have to. It is an option, not a must-have. So if we decide to go directly authorised, then you have to do it by registering to the FCA Connect system. So this is easy to do, is on the FCA website. You'd register for access to it. It's two-factor authentication, and you'll be starting the FCA application form. Now, you can use compliance support such as us at CATS for your application process, but you need to own it. You do not be thinking that if you pass it to us or Simply Biz or 360, that we'll do all the paperwork for you and it just be submitted and you can carry on writing business as normal, etc. Of course, we would aim to take a lot of the grunt work away, but you still need to be absolutely in control of this. You need to be invested into this. This is not something you can just outsource away and not take ownership of it, because any document sent over to you, you would be expected to read it, to amend it, and to make sure it's accurate, because that's what you're submitting to the FCA. Now, there is a fee to the FCA, which is payable upon application, which is £2,500, and this is non-refundable. So what this means is, if you decide halfway through the process that you want to remove your application, you can remove your application, it's not a problem, but you won't get your money back. Equally, if the FCA rejects your application for whatever reason, you won't get your money back. Now, again, you would have seen quite a bit on social media, I think, about saying that the FCA doesn't like sole traders, it doesn't like small firms, it is rejecting their application forms, and quite negative. Now, the FCA have rejected FCA applications, there's no doubt about it, but here at CATS, we've only had one application where the FCA said we're minded not to approve, and the lady withdrew her application. And that's since we've been going since 2005. There are some hoops that you need to jump through. We have had to take it up to supervisor level and appeal, for example. We have had those situations, but that is the exception rather than the norm. If you're prepared for your application, you know what's coming, you know what the FCA are looking at, and you can answer the FCA queries efficiently and effectively, they can't refuse you. They can't refuse you to say, well, you're just a one-man band. They can't. They could say, look, we don't think you're sustainable, or we think your model might be not, go away and think it through. You may need more money for your capital adequacy. They can absolutely throw that at you. But they can't turn around and say, look, we're not authorising you because you're a one-man band. They can absolutely challenge you in your fit and properness. Absolutely. So if you are leaving a firm because you're not happy with the management, you're having angst, there's a bit of friction there, you do need to get regulatory references. And so you need to, if you think that regulatory reference is not going to be a very good one, you need to know and get ahead of the game. Think of what the FCA is going to be looking at and challenge you for. because you can't, you know, the regulatory reference, you know, you could appeal, you could go for data, you know, ask for your records from the firm about what information I got on you, etc. But just get ahead of it and just say, look, I'm leaving the firm because of da 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 da. I think this is unfounded because of da da da, and here's other references that will back up that I am a fit and proper person. So again, manage your own expectation. It could be you're leaving a network and you're looking to go directly authorised. So make sure you check the contract with the network to see what notice period you've got. If it's a month, then that could be quite hasty. If it's 3 months, then you've got a bit of leading time. But the FCA will have to contact the network for that regulatory reference. Now, you don't need to get that regulatory reference straight away when you're sending that application, but you do need to put in the application document, the process that you submit to via the Connect system, to say you can contact the network, but only at such time, you know, for a regulatory reference, only at such time that you're ready to move things forward, because I haven't given them notice yet and I don't want to rock the boat. Some advisors have a really good relationship with the network, and they go to them and say, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing, and the network's really good. They help them through the process, they understand. You know, there'll be networks out there that want to get rid of AR firms because they're having to hold more capital adequacy, there's more governance in place. So they may see that as a welcome that you're looking to leave and go with their blessing. And it's a nice, you know, parting the company in good terms. But there's some of the grunt work you'll need to be thinking of. How long is the process going to take? So you need to be thinking, once you've made a decision to go directly authorised, you've got to be thinking 6 to 8 weeks, really, to prepare all the paperwork. And we'll look and see what that is in a bit. Once it gets to the SDA, once you've submitted it, they'll send you an email saying thank you very much, thanks for your money, you need to be then waiting for it to go to a case handler, which is the first stop, really. And that case handler will look to see, is all the paperwork in order? Have they got any questions? Now, it doesn't matter how well you think that application is, how thorough it is. The SEO will always come back with questions. There always is. And you may get frustrated because you think, well, I've already answered. That's already there in the documentation. Don't get wound up. Don't get emotional about this. Don't get frustrated. You know, they're going through a lot of documents, doing a lot of forms day in, day out. They will miss things. Just take a deep breath and just direct them to the relevant section and say that, you know, I have confirmed this, and just keep it to the point. But don't get emotional about it, which is really hard, especially as time goes on. And I get it, but that's a top tip, I suppose. Managing expectations. Now, of course, the FCA have 6 months for simple applications from the time that they consider an application to be complete. Now, firstly, a simple application would be basically you're not asking for discretionary permissions, you're not looking to handle client monies, you're not looking to have permissions to be a platform provider, for example. It is just a simple personal investment firm, straightforward, 6 months. Now, a completed application is considered to be at the point that the FCA is satisfied that you've answered all their questions and all the paperwork is in order. As part of that, though, you will have to have interviews, and we'll go on to that in a bit more, but expect to have at least 2 interviews. So it could take 4 to 6 months to get to that point that they think that an application is complete. Now, luckily, usually, once you've got to that point, the next step of then reviewing it as a, you know, just a one-off, you know, making sure all the I's are ticked and the T's are crossed and all the rest of it, it's usually quite straightforward. But you've got to be looking at 4 to 6 months from submission to the FCA. Now, of course, as I said to you before, you could ask for compliance support to help with this application process. I'm not sure about other providers out there, but our fees are £2,000 plus VAT prepare the application for you, and then once it's submitted, we charge £100 plus VAT to deal with any queries you have and to help you with the coaching for the interviews and stuff. You'll be surprised at how much interaction you'll have with your compliance support with this application, which is why I say it's not a submit the application, it's a one, that's it. There's a lot more involved to it. So what to consider, so before we even start looking at starting an application form, going through the multiple forms that there are, there's a number of things you need to be looking at about the structure of your firm. Are you going to go for a limited company or an LLP, register with Companies House, or are you going to be a sole trader, or are you just going to go into a partnership with somebody? We would always advocate that you go for a limited company or an LLP. Limited company is best because it's a separate legal entity. What that means is it needs to hold its own assets, of course, its own capital adequacy. If you're a sole trader, you can use your personal assets as part of your capital adequacy. The problem is, though, when you come to retiring as a sole trader, you've got that liability forevermore. At a partnership, the liability rests with you. If you're a limited company or LLP, at the point that the company is dissolved on Companies House, that liability is gone. And then it can go to the FSCS. If you're a sole trader, you get a complaint, you're 80 odd years old, but you've still got your house and all the rest of it, assets, and a complaint's upheld, then you still may have to pay out, which sucks. So that's the first thing you need to be thinking about. If we are a limited company, who are the shareholders? So your accountant will always say, undoubtedly, if it's you, get your wife involved, you have 51%, she has 49%, and that would help from a tax, personal tax, your dividends that you're going to take, which is fine. But the FCA will want to know of who else is a shareholder in the firm. And if you've got a shareholder at outset as part of the application, you have to confirm who the shareholders are. If you've got a shareholder of over 20%, then they have to have an individual controller form that they have to complete, and that will involve sending up their own CV, their own personal assets and liabilities, and what involvement are they going to have in the firm. What they're looking for is who's controlling the firm. Supposing you've got to be part of a group, but then that's a whole different ball game. And they'll do that application for you. To be fair, that's quite chunky. You may be advised to set up a holding company for whatever reason. So the holding company is going to own 100% of your new authorised entity. The FCA will want to know who controls that holding company, why we got a holding company, and how is it all going to work. They want to see what that structure is. So you'll need to send up, as part of the application process, an organisational chart saying, these are the directors, these are shareholdings, if there's any holding companies, what that looks like and why. So, yeah, who's controlling the company? What is your business model? So what we're thinking of here is who are your clients? Who are you going to be are you going to just be targeting any and everybody who wants to do business with you, or are you going to be quite specific? Are you going to be using active funds or passive funds or blend? Are you going to be ESG specialist? Are you going to just use discretionary investment managers? If so, what type? Is it going to be a bespoke or a model portfolio service? What's your firm going to look like? And then, what are your charges? What is the advice process going to look like? When you're thinking of setting up your firm from outset, you think, this is utopia. I can have the firm exactly how I want. And that's true, but spend the time thinking through, what does that look like? It shouldn't be a surprise when you're starting to put the answer to the FCA applications, when they ask questions about platforms and what due diligence you're going to hold. You shouldn't be at that point thinking, oh gosh, I don't know, I haven't thought of that. You want to have an idea of what you're going to be doing at outset. You do need to be thinking up setting up a bank account for the business. Now, to be fair, most people won't do that until you submitted the application, because you need an FCA number. But you at least need to be finding out, if you haven't already, how you go about setting up a bank account for the business. Now, that may sound like it should be easy, but it isn't. So as soon as you say a regulated entity, the FCA, the bank will usually want an FCA number. So that's why you need to submit it, because as soon as you submit the application, you'll be given an FCA number. But just think through, just do a bit of prep work so that you can press the button and get cracking as soon as that application's been sent off. Think about how you're going to attract clients. Are you going to have introducers? Now, if you're going to have an introducer, then that will be part of the application process, and they'll want to know, are these unregulated introducers or regulated introducers? How are the clients going to be introduced from one firm to another? Is the introducer going to be involved in the advice process whatsoever? Top tip, no, they shouldn't. It should be, here's a client, this is what I want to speak to you about, they get in contact with you, or copying an email to each other, copying in the client and just referring the client over, and that's it. They shouldn't be getting involved in handing over any terms of business, privacy notices, fact finds are a complete no-no. It is literally an introduction. But if you are going to have introducers, you need to be thinking about, is there going to be a pay away? And if so, we would always advocate having some kind of formal introducer agreement that just confirms that you're not going to act upon any execution-only advice, because the introducer shouldn't be giving any advice. We shouldn't, that the introducer can't get involved in the process, that they're aware of the bribery regulations, and there's certain things that need to be added into those introducer agreements. You also need to be thinking about whether you need compliance support for the firm. So the FCA, 11, 12 years ago, did a review on small firms, especially those that use compliance support third parties like ourselves. And they always said, look, you don't have to have compliance support third party. There's enough information on the FCA website for you to navigate around and to run a business, because it should be on a proportionate basis. And so if you are using compliance support, why are you using support? Are you actually acting upon their recommendations? What is the interaction? What are they doing? How does the report process work, kind of thing? So I think now it's getting harder and harder for firms not to have some level of compliance support, even if that's just sitting in the background, like 360, Simple Risk Cats, some access to templates, newsletters, keep you up to date with what's going on, a basic level, file checking, that kind of thing. But there's not a question that says, there's a question in the application saying, are you using compliance support? But it's not mandated. But equally, they may raise it as a challenge to say, well, how are you managing your risks, your compliance risks in the firm if you're not using compliance support? So just think about what you guys say, that's all. Along a similar vein, when you're looking at the firm, what admin support are you going to have? Are you going to employ somebody, or are you going to outsource it? There's loads of firms out there where you can outsource admin support that are really quite effective, and I believe at a good price. Of course, what power planning are you going to use? Again, many good power planning firms out there, and they could do. Don't think that power planning firms can just write a report for you. There's so much more than that. As Sharon would advocate, centralised investment propositions, platform due diligence, CRPs, centralised retirement propositions, all that you need to be thinking of. Think about, where does your expertise lie and what's your vision, and do you need to get a third party in to help you with that? Also, start looking at what IT support you're going to need. Have you got any good contacts? Start thinking about data security. The FCA will absolutely be honing in on data security. And also think about what licenses you'll need for software. Now, will you have a back office system? You don't have to have a back office system. That is not mandated. But you are expected to have control and governance about your data and how you're going to store it, and how your file management. Absolutely. Are you going to use cash flow modelling, Voyant, Truth, Cash Calc? Are you going to use Timeline? What research, FE, Morningstar? Are you going to use risk questionnaires? and are they going to be online like Phenometrica? What does that all cost? What are the tie-ins for that? Who's going to have access to it? All this you need to be thinking even before you put pen to paper. Mindful, I've spoken quite a bit there, Sharon. So, any questions?
I was just going to say that, Mel. I'm going to just pause it for a moment, open up to questions from the group if anybody has got any questions. I'd like to think that we're giving quite a real picture here, although anyone that hasn't got any experience in financial planning or being a financial planner will just think that we're scaring them off. But all of these things, they come to me as things that you would or should be naturally thinking about if you are looking to go DA, start your own firm, taking more of that responsibility for yourself. So I can see we've got a question in. I'm just going to run through a couple of questions that I've brought up as well as I've gone through, and we might be touching on these a bit later anyway. But from what you've been talking about, it seems like, and you haven't mentioned that you might need this as a sort of an outsourced person. You've talked about an accountant, but what about legal advice? It sounds like legal advice might be more key in some situations than others. Like you talked about, there might be a bit of friction, maybe leaving a network or leaving an employer, and that probably indicates you're going to go down the legal advice route, or guidance, or take that, or maybe HR advice there. But is that something that would be standard practice in going directly authorised, to have a solicitor, legal advice in as part of the process?
No, not usually.
No, okay.
It's only, no. I mean, it's only if it's something a bit quirky. In this way, like you say, you need to be thinking through, what does this look like before I make a decision?
Yeah.
So we have had situations where there has been what's the word? It hasn't been a very amicable split, and the employee took the firm to nearly tribunal. We did go to tribunal. But as part of the fit and proper, and it got resolved. It was all fine in the end. And part of the settlement was that they would give a good regulatory reference, and the FCA accepted it. And so it's all about keeping the FCA in the loop and setting your stall out, about what's happened, and being open and honest. What shouldn't happen with any part of this application is a surprise that comes out of the woodwork. Because straight away, the FCA will be thinking, well, why didn't you declare it? And what else are you hiding? It puts you on the back foot straight away. So you want to get all the rubbish right out on the open, and then manage that. If it turns out that if there's some legal proceedings going on, or HR stuff, that's usually happening anyway at the moment, which is why they're looking to go directly authorised and set up their own firm. But it's not a mandated, you should have legal advice or representation in place at outset. No.
Great, perfect. I was hoping that was going to be somewhat of the answer. And you said about like looking at your existing contract potentially. Obviously people can look at those from their own view, but if you need some guidance on it, I guess that's when you go to a HR professional or a legal professional to get that kind of advice.
Yeah.
Great, perfect. And then following into that, then involving other people, you talked about setting up how you set up your business. Finding somebody else to go into business with, is that a good idea in your opinion? Have you seen, have you got any guidance on that kind of thing?
Yeah, good question. So we often have quite a few conversations with people just inquiring about it. And if somebody has got a good experience, they've been going on for some time, and they've got a good process, good client bank sitting behind them, even if they're employed, or self-employed or whatever, usually you can get an idea of what their experience has been. Now, just because you haven't held compliance oversight function or money laundering a function before does not preclude you from getting authorised, because otherwise just no firm will get authorised, It's all about how have you built up your knowledge to be able to be competent to hold those areas. But we'll touch upon that in a bit. But we have had situations where I've had somebody who they've got their diploma, for example, but they're not being signed off as competent advisor status. That is a difficult one. That you absolutely need somebody else in the firm who will be able to supervise and who is qualified and can check the suitability of your work, as well as you may have additional compliance support in the background, saying we do pre-sale checks or yada yada, that kind of thing. So, should you have two people in the firm? It really depends on the circumstances. You know, if you've got somebody who's sitting in the background who's looking to retire, may want to be a non-exec, for example, well, non-exec would not hold any senior management functions. So they wouldn't be as a SMF3 director on the FCA register, but they will be on the directory as a non-exec director to help with the direction of the firm. And you may have that person as a sounding board. You know, that could, you know, a bit of a mentor, maybe. That could work. That just demonstrates that you are serious about the business, you're having a sense check, you know, somebody's there. They will depend on what the new firm looks like. If it's going to be quite a bigger firm or has big plans to expand quite rapidly, they may say, well, what resources do you have in place? Do you span the control? Do you need to separate out the senior management functions? How are you going to do your day job of advising clients and run the business? They will always ask that conflict. How are you going to manage that conflict?
Yeah, and I thought that came in really well. As I think, Mel, you covered off, you know, reaching out. Do you need some compliance support? Do you need administrators? Do you need power planning? It's more about thinking about the job that you're actually wanting to do, probably more than, you know, who you're going to use or how you're going to use them. Because if you know what job you want to do and that you're good at and the things that you're not so good at, then it's an easy way to maybe, you know, divide up those responsibilities and think about other parties being involved, whether that's bringing somebody else in the business or outsourcing it to somebody else. I can see somebody has their hand up in our audience. If you want to send in a question, feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat function. That's probably the easiest way, and then we can pick them up as we go through. Mel, I'm going to pass back over to you now. I think we're going to get a bit stuck into the money side of things.
Absolutely.
Now, which I think is what, you know, I'm really interested in knowing, and I know I get asked this question all the time, so I'm going to shut up and pass back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so at the moment, the capital adequacy rules is 20,000 or 5% of your projected regulated income, whichever is the highest. Now, it may be higher if your PI quote shows an excess that it is higher than £5,000 for any type of business. And under the FCA rulebook, there's a grid that says this is your turnover and this is the excess, and it shows you how much additional capital adequacy you need to have. And it's you know, the same as if there's an exclusion for a particular product that you intend to write, there's a table for that. Now, of course, at this point is a projected. This is what, you know, so this needs to tie in with your cash flow forecast that you'll have to send in. So if we're projecting our cash flow forecast that you're going to write more than 400,000 in regulated income, then of course it's going to be 5% of whatever that figure is. Now, it needs to be realistic, your cash flow forecast. For most firms, it's going to be 20,000. And usually, I've never seen an instance where a PI shows an excess higher than 5,000 because it's a brand new entity. There's no liabilities on the book. So as long as you are quite vanilla in your proposals or what you intend to do, you know, normal pension investments using a platform, nothing quirky, you know, you usually not going to have an excess higher than 5,000 or an exclusion. And you should be quite easily able to get a PI quote. But the capital needs to be liquid capital, i.e. cash. And the FCA will not press the button to authorise you until they see evidence of that money sitting in that bank account, which comes back to my earlier point that you need to set up that bank account as soon as possible. And you need to be showing that amount of money that has to be your baseline. It has to be kept at all times. So you need to think this through. You need then hire more than 20,000, say, because you need to have running costs. It's going to take time to set your agencies up. It's going to take time to get business written, even if you've got an existing client bank, to move those over. You know, so you've got to be thinking about your working capital and how much dividend income you're going to take out, etc. So this all needs to be factored in. As I say, you need to submit a 3-year cash flow forecast. Some firms have they have their 20 grand and they have it in a separate savings account, so that's always there, and then they have a working account, which is fine, works well. But just remember that if your working account has an overdraft, for example, then that is offset against the savings account, if that makes sense. You know, for the firm as a whole, as an entity, always has to meet their minimum capital adequacy benchmarks. Now, you do need to be thinking about what accountancy system you got to be having in place, whether it's Xero, for example, Sage. There is a system called MyRegData, which is an accounting software. So you can submit your accounts to Companies House from there. Your accountant can go in and it's all about bookkeeping, but it also helps you with your reg data returns direct to the FCA. It has a link direct to the FCA, so you can see what your balance sheet is at all times and your capital adequacy calculations. So start thinking about what software system you're going to be having in place and who your accountant's going to be. You do need to be aware, and the FCA would expect you to be aware, that in November last year they published CP 23/24, which is about capital adequacy for personal investment firms, and they are proposing that firms hold over and above the minimum capital adequacy amounts based on any known or potentially known liabilities that are going to be sitting on the balance sheet. So, for example, existing personal investment firms, any DB transfer business they've had and they've got complaints, they need to be making sure that they're holding over and above capital adequacy than their baseline amount. Now, for a brand new firm, of course, again, there'll be no liability on the book, but it does come down to what type of business, again, you're thinking of doing. Are you doing VCTs and EISs at some point? Are you going to be doing DB transfer advice? And so, this is where using a consultant, whoever that may be, can help you think that through. And the FCA may challenge you. Okay, so this is where you are year one. What about year 2 and year 3? Where do you see this going? Especially if you're looking to specialise in advising professional clients that work in the city and go be high earners, and so you may be doing VCTs and EISs and those slightly quirky things. So capital adequacy is a big thing, and bear in mind, it just sometimes gets overlooked about the working capital. And there will be implications if you're borrowing money to set up the company and via a holding group. Supposing you're using someone like Virtus to buy a client bank, and that money is resting with the holding company. You need to really think through how this is going to impact the regulated entity. This is where it can get a bit quirky. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. So what else? Absolutely need to be shown throughout the whole of all the documentation that you're sending out to the FCA and your application forms, how the consumer duty has been considered as part of the firm processes. How we take into account value, our service, how we go track when a client needs servicing, how do we know that the charges we're going to charge is going to be of value, and the investment strategy. What is our investment strategy? You need to have prod all set out. Before. This is not a prod, and investment strategy is not something you can do after the event. How will you consider the ESG objectives of a client? The FCA, absolutely, we've seen about 20 questions asked around this area and asking for your competency in this area. So what CPD, are you active in this environment already? We've talked about what back office systems will you have in place, IO, Planner, Wealthcraft, what staff will you have, what will the client servicing process be? And then competency as compliance officer and money laundering. What does this look like? So this is where, as part of the application, you're sending a Form A. And the Form A is our fit and proper questions, where you worked. You will have to have a DBS check, a standard one, not a basic one, and it has to be within the last 3 months. So if you had one done 6 months ago, you're going to have it done again. I said earlier that you may not be holding these functions at the moment, which is fine. So what you need to be thinking of is, what courses can I go on to help build my knowledge as a compliance officer and a money laundering reporting officer? What are the expectations? What does the FCA handbook say? Is there somebody I can shadow or who will act as a mentor for me in these areas? Is there a bit of a handover process, or, for example, at the moment? How are you? Have you registered for the FCA monthly regulatory updates that confirms everything that's going on in the last month? Do you know about what consultation papers the FCA has published, like sustainable disclosure requirements, capital adequacy, diversity and inclusion? They will ask questions about diversity and inclusion. How does that impact your firm, the people that you recruit, or the outsourcing firms that you use? How's your diversity and inclusion policy going to impact your clients? Is it going to reflect your client bank, for example? Are you aware of what money laundering regulations are out there? The trust registration service, for example, are you on it? Have you registered to make a suspicious transaction report with the National Crime Agency already? So if you get a suspicion, you know what to do straight away, not just like rabbit in the headlights kind of thing. This is all the prep work that you need to put together, and you will have to submit a gap analysis to the FCA. You should be submitting your CPD, which reflects all the activity that you've done over the last year, to build up your knowledge in this area. So to demonstrate that you're not going into this blind, you do know what the expectations are. You will absolutely be interviewed by the FCA around this. They will ask you about, what do you know about the senior management regime? What does your statement of responsibilities look like? What about certification? What does competency look like? So whilst if you are a sole trader, you don't technically have to have a T&C scheme, but it's good practice to have one, just to manage and say that this is what I'm going to abide by. If you're more than one firm, then you need to have a T&C scheme. So what this means is this is all kinds of, as saying, the prep work, and asking questions and getting on courses. And so, as I say, you'll have to send up a skills analysis, a gap analysis to the FCA as part of the application, and then you have to confirm what you're going to do about it to fill in those gaps and also to maintain your competency. And it's okay that you may have a few gaps. That's not a problem, as long as you're not submitting the application form with zero knowledge at all. Because they'll just say, look, you're not ready, and just chuck it out, and it's a complete waste of your money at that point, really. So, what I'm saying is it doesn't. If you haven't got any previous experience, it does not mean to say you can't submit an FCA application, but just make sure that you do a little grunt work and prep beforehand. Is it okay? Have you got any questions at all around that?
The only one I'm going to throw in there, Mel, is, and I know it's probably not a one-size-fits-all, well, it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all, but anyway, when you're looking at making that application, talking about capital adequacy, what sort of amount of money are we talking about being a good idea for working capital as well as capital adequacy? Is there a number?
No, this all will come down to your cash flow forecast. Okay. And there's various templates out there, but you need to be factoring in, obviously, your dividends got to survive. And so what you would do as part of your capital adequacy, usually people would put in what they call a subordinated loan. So that's a loan from you into the limited company, for example. And there'll be formal subordinated loan agreement, which is on the FCA handbook. And it basically says that you can't release those funds away from the firm until such time that the company can stand on its own 2 feet. It doesn't need that loan from you. And you can't do it for a minimum of 3 years. So it'll be a subordinated loan, and you want to be taking the money from the company for tax efficiency, really. So you've got to be thinking about what income you need, what you're licensing that you're paying, compliance, what IT, so rule of thumb, I suppose 40, 50 grand, depending on the makeup, if you're a sole trader. That's what you need to be thinking of.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was my thoughts about the kind of money that I think you might need. But no, it's good to get an idea at least. And showing your business practice will go into the cash flow. It will set you up. It will set you up really well. Anyone that's already kind of running their own, as part of a network, will have done a business plan. But if you haven't done a business plan, you'll need it. Whether you think it's just part of the FCA application, it's very good, real life practice for running a business, because it is running a proper business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway,
totally.
I'm going to pass back to you, Mel, and I know you're going to have a look at kind of the actual submission, what kind of documents you might need. So let's have a look at those and see what the next stages are.
Yep. also mindful of time, so I'll rattle through some of these. A lot of these we have touched upon. So there are set FCA forms that you have to complete. You need a PI quote, cash flow forecast, CVs for directors and shareholders, business continuity plan, vulnerable client policy, regulatory references. Regulatory references, you have to go back for 5 years. It's set wording that had to be given, and whoever you send the regulatory reference to has to complete it. So it goes into questions about did you hold a senior management function? Were there any disciplinary areas, for example, any complaints? Business plan, like you was alluding to, Sean, DBS checks, as I say, standard. It will be thrown back if you don't do a standard check. Maybe ask for a wind down plan. So this is an interesting one because if you're a personal investment firm, then technically you don't need a wind down plan, but the FCA, you wouldn't know it by some of the language that the FCA asks sometimes. Yeah, so I would do a wind down plan as part of your preparation anyway, just in case the FCA asks for it. You don't want to be caught in a hop. You know, because as part of the application, you're ticking a box to say that as soon as the FCA give the go ahead for you to be directly authorised, you are up and running. There's, you know, you are signing the application forms to say all your compliance manuals in place, your disclosure documents in place, the software's in place. You know, even though you've got such a long lead-in time for this FCA application, that's what you're signing to. You also absolutely have to have a compliance monitoring plan. You have to submit that. That compliance monitoring plan confirms, look, you know what tasks are due and when, and who's responsible for them. So things like your firm attestation every year, your reg data returns, the invoicing system, you need to be set up on that. Your annual audits, checking of registers, the combating financial crime procedures, your annual reports, your consumer duty reports, you know, all that will be listed on your compliance monitoring plan, so you know when a task is due, and you're not leaving everything to the last minute. So that's a flavour of some of the documents to be submitted as part of the application. We then go. So what happens next? Basically, once you submit the application, the FCA will acknowledge that receipt of that. As I say, it will go to a case handler. It needs to be considered complete, and this just reconfirms what I said earlier. Really, you can have compliance support sitting in on these interviews with the FCA, but they cannot answer for you. The FCA are absolutely hot on that. So all we can do is act as a bit of a sitting on your shoulder, giving you a bit of support if we're there, and we may on occasion be able to interject to maybe just, you know, clarify or give a bit of flavour, but we are really constrained as to how involved we can get. But of course, this all comes down, we can't tell you what questions they're going to ask. We're banned from doing that, but we can give you a flavour of this is where the FCA may be looking at, this is the homework you need to be doing. And as I said earlier, expect to have quite a few questions emailed to you. Make sure you're on the case. Respond quickly and effectively. Don't get emotional in your responses. You just need to be to the point and be patient. I know it can be frustrating, but that's the case. So you're authorised, and then what next? As I say, before you press the button, they'll need to see evidence of capital adequacy and that the fact that PI is on risk. You will need client permissions. If you have a client bank already and you're moving it away, then obviously the firm that you're moving away from, as part of your grunt work, before you've even submitted the application, you need to be thinking about any restrictions you may have on taking your clients. What does that look like? Client, how you get data. Be very mindful, of course, about who owns that data. A firm cannot stop a client leaving them and following another advisor, because ultimately the relationship is with the advisor. What you cannot do it'll be in the contract, I'm absolutely sure, is take their data with them. You cannot actively pursue those clients and saying, I'm setting up on my own. Do you want to come with me? That is ripe for legal, there's a legal, them coming after you for breach of contract. So that may be where you need to get some legal representation involved if it goes down that route. It doesn't need to be messy, but sometimes it can. But you should have bottomed this out, what the process is going to be at outset, really. And then, of course, and this is what can be quite quite painful, is setting up your agencies. And again, do not be thinking you can do a bulk transfer of your clients into a new agency. You have to get client permission to do a transfer of an agency, because it is the fee is between you and the firm. You and the client. It's not like commission where it's between the product provider and the firm. So the FCA frown upon this. There's consultation papers and guidance around this. So that's things to be thinking about. What next? And what support is out there? So the FCA do have this page. They updated it last year, tail end of last year, and it's really good. It gives some really good information there, and about managing expectations. And there is, of course, our website where we've got our services tab. It sets out about how we can help firms. And we do also have a learning space on the Next Gen Planners website. And one of our managers, Gemma Knight, heads up most of our FCA applications. She does it day in, day out. And she's done a series of videos with our apprentice, Gosha, talking through about, if you're looking to go directly authorised, these are the kind of things that you need to be considering. And she's broken it down with the Form A's into a lot more information, the controller forms, a lot more information there as well. So any questions?
Thank you, Mel. That's been really, really helpful. And I'm going to open the floor to questions. We've got a few minutes left. And as always, I've got a couple of my own as well. So I'm just going to go into that, if that's okay. Obviously, you are a compliance firm that firms can outsource to, both new directly authorised firms and existing firms. And I'm guessing you might know the difficulties in this, but how would you know, if you wanted to employ a compliance officer in your firm, how would you go about finding a good one? And are they out there?
So, employing a compliance officer. So, the firms used to have employed compliance consultants to take over the SMF 16 and 17 functions. That is not something I would advocate today because of the scrutiny. The FCA is looking at, then if they're not doing the day-to-day running of the company, how do they actually know what's going on in the firm, the risks? And just to have it just as a name will not wash. So if you're looking to employ a compliance person, then obviously it's through the normal recruitment channels, I would say. And what you're looking for is, what involvement have they had with the FCA before? How they managed the application process and day-to-day running? Do you need that person on a full-time or part-time basis? You need to be looking, I would say, I'm guessing here, to be fair, but for a full-time compliance person, you've got to be looking at 50 to 60 grand a year.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Plus benefits, depending where you're located. So that's why most small firms would start off outsourcing their compliance support.
And probably similar to power planning, I'm guessing. We have the same issue. It's how do you find out what people know and how experienced they are in the really technical stuff? It depends on the firm as to what they need, but assessing those if you don't do those roles is really, really tricky, I think. So probably following on from that, and we alluded to some of these points earlier, but finding a good community, I think, not so much of a question, but just a point. Finding the community, the financial planning community, is going to be really key, I think, to your application process, being successful in your firm, especially if you are maybe less experienced in being in the full decision making IFA kind of world. Because that's, you've got people holding your hands there, offering you guidance on what systems they might use, where they might find really great clients or really great people that they might want to employ when they get to that stage. Who's offering a bank account to regulated entities, who's not, what are people hearing? I've we see that sort of stuff going on all the time, which we find really useful. And I know that it'd be really difficult to do it without that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, you've got IFA Talk, haven't you? You've got Next Gen Planners, obviously.
Yeah.
You've got the Empowered Group.
Yeah.
And
LinkedIn.
There's
Yeah.
loads. Yeah, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So
make use of your community. I think that's
totally
probably the
agree.
thing.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll leave it there for today then, Mel. Thank you very much for joining me. We've had some requests to release the recording and the slides, so we'll make sure we get those together. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks
Have a good
very
rest of your
much.
week. Take care. Bye.
Bye.